For the entirety of human history, wars have been fought humans against humans, nations against nations. But how would you feel if I told you there was once a war fought between humans and emus? That's right, emus. And then how would you feel if I told you that the emus ended up actually winning the war? Today I'm going to be talking about the Emu War of 1932. Now, while it's fun to go back and laugh at the ridiculous events that took place, I feel like this war is actually very important because it speaks to the importance of knowing who your enemy is before you actually end up fighting them. Because while they may seem at first very easy to kill, they may actually become very difficult and your biggest formidable opponent. Now, as a person who studied the Emu War for 3 major projects as of this point, I feel like I have the credibility to display this information to you. Ultimately, the Australian government just wanted to help the soldiers returning to Australia by giving them land, but when this land got ravaged, they wanted to help out by killing the emus. However, their lack of knowledge as to the resilience of these emus would prove to be their biggest downfall and biggest embarrassment following the war. Now, following World War I, thousands of Australian soldiers returned to Australia in need of some sort of stable income, so in an attempt to help them out, the Australian government purchased 90,000 hectares of land, according to the Journal of Australian Studies. Unfortunately, this land was situated on the margins of Australian society. And the margins of Australian society were most susceptible to rodent and emu infestation. Ultimately, the emus invaded all of these farms and ate all of their crops, which made all these ex-soldiers turned farmers very angry. So these soldiers went to the government and requested their assistance. So, in response to this, the Minister of Defense, George Pearce, deployed General P. Meredith with 2 soldiers armed with Lewis guns, with one simple request of 100 emu skins, the feathers of which will be used for hats worn by horsemen, according to the Canberra Times. Unfortunately, what these soldiers and Major P. Meredith were not aware of was that emus are actually incredibly resilient creatures to bullets, and they also have the speed to run away from the soldiers. The war began November 3rd, 1932, in which the soldiers confronted a herd of 50 emus. The soldiers opened fire naturally, and all of the emus scattered. This catches the soldiers off guard as they realize that the emus are actually incredibly fast, and the bullets that they fired at the emus didn't do much to them, as they only were able to claim a few lives. In the days following, there were many events such as this where they would find small little herds and shoot at them, and then the emus would run away. Ultimately, George P. Meredith recognized that the emus would prove to be a far more formidable opponent than he had thought, so he attempted multiple different strategies. One of these strategies being confronting a herd of around 1,000 emus against a dam by having them cornered. General P. Meredith, situated with the 2 soldiers, shot at the 1,000 emus, but one of the Lewis guns jammed, and ultimately all of the emus ran away, with only 12 emus being killed. 1,000 emus were cornered, and only 12 emus were killed. In another embarrassing situation, General P. Meredith tried mounting a Lewis gun to the back of a truck, which they would then attempt to use to chase the emus as they were running away after they shot at them. But, unbeknownst to General P. Meredith, the truck would actually end up being slower than the emus. And then on top of that, the ride would be so bumpy that the gunner on the back of the truck with the Lewis gun wouldn't even be able to shoot at the emus because they would be too focused on holding on. After this assault, the Australian government finally decided it was probably time to withdraw the troops, and in questioning after the Sunday Herald questioned General P. Meredith as to the resilience of the emus, General P. Meredith had to say, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would be able to face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." Now, the occurrence of this war would prove to be so embarrassing that Defense Minister George Pearce was nicknamed the Minister of the Emu War, according to the Australian Geographic. Now imagine that. Imagine being in charge of an event so stupendously stupid that you would forever be nicknamed the Minister of the Emu War. This title itself just sounds completely ridiculous and speaks to the ridiculousness of the event. Regardless of this, however, despite the apparent failure, the farmers still had their crops ravaged by emus, and they once again requested the help of the government. So the government once again deployed Major P. Meredith with the 2 soldiers. In the course of 2 months or so, these soldiers managed to kill 986 emus at a cost of around 9,860 rounds, which ultimately averaged to about 10 bullets per emu. Now, following the retrieval of these soldiers after the second deployment, the Australian government still had the problem that these crops were being ravaged by the emus, and they still had to fix the problem somehow. So, with that knowledge, the Australian government recognized that these farmers that are in need of their help were actually ex-World War I veterans who were fully capable of handling guns. So, they implemented a bounty system, and the bounty system was so successful that in 1934, in only a 6-month period, 57,000 emu lives were claimed, according to the book Bird Stories for a Dry Country. Now, although the emus found themselves being hunted by the thousands following the Emu War of 1932, it would ultimately go down in history that the emus fought the humans and the emus won because the humans ended up surrendering by pulling out their troops. Now, Australian Minister of Defence George Pearce would ever go down in history as the defence minister responsible for the Emu War, which would prove to be his biggest embarrassment. Ultimately, why you probably have never heard of the Emu War of 1934 is because it was such an embarrassing occurrence to fight against a flightless bird and to end up losing to it. Now, the emus did prove to be incredibly resilient. It takes 10 bullets to kill one emu, while you imagine a human, it probably would only take one good shot. Emus are a whole different story. Now, while you're shooting at one emu, you land 10 bullets in it, all the other ones are running away. You only managed to kill one emu, and hundreds of them escaped. Ultimately, their absolute strength and brutal speed, paired with their guerrilla warfare-like style of fighting, made the emus a formidable foe, and they ultimately won the Emu War of 1932.